Hi, everyone. If you've been following this video series, then you know that one of the ways in which we can make our workplaces more inclusive is by checking our biases. Now, I know that that's also tough because by definition, this is where our blind spots are. Biases are often unconscious, and we've talked about that. We've also talked about how if you have a brain, you're biased. Now, when we talked about our biases, a lot of the times the most common ones that are discussed are those related to the protected classes. So what I mean by that is race, gender expression, identity, sexual orientation, marital status, age. So those that are, again, part of the protected classes. Now, what's less often discussed is other types of biases that might be playing into our decision making on a day-to-day, and we might not even realize it. So one of the ones I want to bring up today is affinity bias. Now, affinity bias relates to when we have an attraction, or as the word suggests, an affinity towards others who either look like us or talk like us, think like us. So what happens at the brain level is when somebody's very similar to us, our brain likes it. In other words, it signals to the brain that it's like, right? This person's like me, I can trust them. Anything that is different might signal to our brain that I'm not sure, this could be a threat. And that comes from an evolutionary mechanism that our brain has to protect us from anything that could be a threat to us. Now, what happens is because we make these associations about what's a threat and what's not, oftentimes, again, we're wrong. And so what we want to pay attention to when it comes to affinity bias is making sure that affinity bias is not playing into decision making that is interrupting our opportunity for diversity. Because what we know today is that organizations that are more diverse, that have different perspectives at the table, are more innovative, more creative, and tend to perform better. Now, in the past, we would even say, organizations would say, we hire for fit. We hire for those that are going to fit into our culture. And really, that is a form of affinity bias, because what it means is we're hiring those that are similar to us, who think like us, who are going to fit into this sort of mold. And so we want to watch out for that. What are some of the ways in which your organization or even your department can look out for that? Obviously, when it comes to hiring practices, that's one clear way. So if you're conducting any interviews completely on your own, then you might fall into affinity bias versus having a few different individuals, like organizations that have moved towards panel interviews, or just making sure that different people are playing into that decision-making process. So that's one way. Another way is on your project team. So if you find yourself gravitating to or forming certain project teams with certain individuals that you feel are either have the same leadership style or communication style, or again, think like you, or maybe just even same education, same age, the affinity can come across several dimensions of diversity, then just to check yourself and to say, who might offer a different perspective, a different voice. Maybe it's even a voice that you don't necessarily agree with. So what are the different ways? This is the question that I would pose so you can reflect on how affinity bias might be impacting your workplace, and specifically maybe even your team or your department, is to ask yourself, how might affinity bias be playing into your day-to-day work? And then to ask yourself, how might you mitigate that? Because this is a sneaky one that is not on the list of protected classes, so we don't often talk about it, but it still can have a huge impact. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. If your organization is doing some really interesting or has implemented some really interesting strategies on how to mitigate affinity bias, I want to hear about it in the comments.